Salisbury's centuries-old market, its livestock in particular, reflects the district's strong links with agriculture. Sheep, cattle, pigs, horses, poultry were valuable commodities, and the Wiltshire downland and low-lying water meadows provided the raw materials needed by the farmer. Back in the 1930s, Sarch Farm near Zeals, in the shadow of the Stourhead estate, was owned and run by the Hannam family. Film shot at the time shows a farm with cereal crops, dairy cattle and sheep, overseen by a number of farm labourers operating some pretty lethal-looking machinery. A far cry from today's sleek, state-of-the-art agribusiness. Today, Charles Spencer runs Sarch Farm, with egg production and a farmyard turned into business units, adding to the mix of cattle and crops. Charles was fascinated to see his farm as it was back in the 1930s. The 16mm films made by an aunt of local farmer, the late Bill Taylor, whose mother's family was the Hannams, showed just how different modern farming practice is today, compared with the techniques deployed by farms in the first half of the 20th century.
We're standing in what was a dairy that was built in the 50s and it operated here until 30 years ago. 10 years ago we removed the asbestos building that I would be standing in the middle of and started rebuilding and preserving the buildings that are around us that are now housing local businesses. On this farm we're mainly arable. We feed most of what we grow in the way of cereals to livestock. So we're quite unusual in that we have a feed mill and we produce eggs and we produce milk. And we still have a small flock of sheep on some ground that we can do nothing else with. My father did agriculture at the university and ended up farming nearby for a chap called Frank Sykes, who was quite a big noise in agriculture just after the war. And he took the tenancy of Zeals, St Martin's Farm, in, I think, the late 50s. We then farmed that, and he managed to buy it in 62 when the estate was sold. In the mid-70s, 75, he took the tenancy of the farm we're on, Sarch Farm. Since that time, we've taken on the farm between us, and we've bought some land up on top of the down, so it's nearly in one square patch, if you like. So we probably include, I don't know, half a dozen, what would have been half a dozen farms. And we run it as one farm. It was all very manual in those days. I mean, we've got at least 4 or 5 people here just putting hay into a rick. Nowadays, on the film, there is the family of the Hannams, and as I understand it, I think it's in about 1906, Mr. Hannam took the farm on. He was already the largest farmer in the area, and he sort of added it. And at that point, it has been empty for 2 years. Don't know what had happened to the previous tenant, but farming was such that there just wasn't enough money about or something to actually run it as a farm. If you leave your farm for 2 years, now you could probably tidy it up with Roundup. In those days, there was no herbicides of that sort, which are sort of total killers, and it would be quite an uphill struggle to bring it back, though probably a large proportion of it was down to grass. So it wouldn't be too bad. You just have to sort of hack your way through it and cut it a few times, and it would come back into production. Lots of labour on farms in this time in history. Nowadays there'd be nobody really employed solely on this farm. In these shots it looks as if there are at least 10, if not more. I think in the 30s every farm tended to produce everything, whereas nowadays farmers are more specialised. Although we're slightly against that. We are still a mixed farm, which is very unusual. Whereas in the 30s you would have had cows, you would have grown the crops to feed the cows, you probably had some sheep, probably had some chickens, so you did everything. One farm now is several farms then. The amount of labour you'll see in the film, I mean there's considerable numbers of people running about, and here we are today at Sarch Farm and there's nobody running about. As the time has gone on, we've moved away from a sort of hands-on labour where we're picking up sacks, we're cutting corn by hand or feeding horses, and we moved to tractors, and then we've moved to larger tractors, bulk handling of materials, and fewer men doing the work. It is incredible what one can do now. The old boys in the film were obviously going to be particularly crippled by the time they retired, if indeed they reached retirement. There are some bits of machinery operating which, yes, are frightening really. But there again, we have much bigger pieces of machinery now and more opportunity for maiming into each other. So probably it was a steadier life, and I can't believe too many people got sort of run over by a runaway horse and plough and things like that. Although they didn't worry about health and safety probably to the same extent, it was probably in a funny sort of way safer because there are more of them working together. Often people now working on their own, which is much more dangerous, I think. Most of my neighbouring farms either have no employees or one employee. We're quite unusual in the number we employ. We've got a party on Sunday, and I think there are about 35 people coming, so that's anybody who's involved with the farm and their other halves. So that's quite unusual, I think. But having said that, in the time I've been here, we're probably 3 or 4 people lighter, and we're doing more. So it is a shame, but it's social change. I think everybody who comes to live in the village, and Zeals is very much a farm within a village where a lot of people have moved to, they like to associate themselves with farming. They like to know what's going on. Farming's a very open business. We're not taking part behind closed doors, so everything we do can be seen or smelt. Suddenly, there's terrific support for agriculture in the village, and this is just the same village and the same sort of people, and it is noticeable. It'd be very rare now for somebody to complain about the smell or something like that, whereas before there used to be running battles about smell and animals, but now if we walk cattle down a road, people are thrilled to see it. So things have changed, even in a very short space of time. There's an old boy, he's probably in his 30s. It's a hard life. It wasn't the good old days at all. We always think of the old farm buildings now, but goodness me, don't they look old then? I don't think they did much maintenance. It wasn't the good old days. Even in my time as a 16-year-old, I can remember unloading 50-kilo bags of fertiliser and stacking small bales. And I mean, several summers I did nothing but stack small bales in barns. I mean, it's ridiculous. Now we do it with big bales and it takes a few days, you know. It was horrible. There was nothing nice about it. There were no air-conditioned cabs. There was dust and rubbish, and I mean, it was just horrible. There was nothing good about it, I would have said, in hindsight.